Grifters gonna grift.
Good morning, Trumptopia. A special segment of the almost daily Zencast. Hosted by the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's talk Trump.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, and good night to you, friends, and welcome back. This is Good Morning Trumptopia, and I am your fictional host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Welcome back, friends. Thanks for being here. I appreciate your audience-ship. It's been a hot minute, so let's talk about the craziest, newest thing that's just happened in the land of Trumptopia. As you may or may not have heard, two big pieces of breaking news just broke in the last week and a half. The most recent of which is quite laughable, and the one right before it, the first, quite serious. It's fascinating to me, and so here we are talking about it. So, for anybody who doesn't know or isn't keeping tabs on the news breaking out of Trumptopian activities, here's the scoop. The Trump Organization has been found guilty on 17 counts of conspiracy and fraud by a jury of Trump's peers. This statement alone prompts 1,000 questions, not the least of which is, will the party of quote-unquote corporations are people too? Will this party now bend over backwards to somehow insist a separation between the Trump Organization and the Trump family? Or will they acknowledge and own up to the reality that if the Trump Organization has been found of 17 different counts of conspiracy and fraud, then, I don't know, maybe, just maybe, those of us who warned them that Trump has a lifelong history of shady dealings and grifter-like behavior finally go, oh, this is what they were talking about. Now, that alone was astounding, right? And in fact, people are still reeling from it. And I haven't really seen much of a reaction from the Trumptopian side. Now, I obviously can't monitor all sources, and I'm very passive about that, and I'm very open about that. I don't pretend to be an expert in anything, friends. I'm just an open-minded observer of current events and how people respond to them in my limited circle of acquaintances and, social media connections. Now, typically, when a big news item breaks about Trump, they are quick. The Trump base is quick to get out there into the social media public discourse fray and, perform mental gymnastics to rationalize away the significance of whatever interesting news may have broken and point all the fingers of blame at anyone and everyone else. But curiously, I have yet to really find much of a response. Now, it's obviously must be happening out there. I just haven't come across it. But the times that I dipped into Fox News to see, what are they going to talk about it? Are they talking about it? I really haven't come across anything. They're really, 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 really obsessively focused on Biden and the laptop issue. Now, as I've said before, let them investigate. Pin on the corkboard. We'll circle back and talk about that. But 17 counts of fraud and conspiracy It resonates with another recent massive court case that sort of disrupted the right-wing media circus, which is, if you'll recall, now I'm forgetting what his name is. It's kind of a sidebar. What's his name? The guy with the TV with the podcast. The guy I'm always saying, like, if that guy can build a media empire on just huffing and puffing and yelling about stuff, then why can't I build a media empire with my tactics? Wow, I'm just going to have to just leave that talking point alone until I can remember his name. Sorry. This is just proof and evidence that my show is real, raw, and radically unscripted. I'm not reading from a teleprompter. I'm not reading from a script handed to me by anybody else. I'm literally just coming on the air and speaking to you off the top of my own head and from my own notes, about stuff that's been going on. I can see his face. I can see the memes about him realizing that he's going to lose. But I can't remember his name right now. But he was, excuse me, he lost a case and he was ordered to pay billions of dollars to the families of Sandy Hook. You'll know who I'm talking about, right? Forgive me for not being able to remember his name as I'm literally staring at his face in my mind's eye. Whatever his name is, his media empire will now hopefully cease to exist because it's built on lies, exaggerations, misinformation, and all wrapped up in little nuggets of apparent truth. But the most egregious thing he did in the last 10 years, and his court case came just in time for the 10-year anniversary of the Sandy Hook incident. And as we touch on that, may I take a moment to send my genuine, heartfelt thoughts and prayers, not only to the families and survivors of Sandy Hook, but to what must be millions of people who have survived the escalating number of incidences since then. Now, to go on a tangent real quick, some of us have been speaking out about the gun industry's profiteering and irresponsible messaging for decades. Some of us have been mocked and ridiculed as alarmists and fearmongers for talking about how the gun industry is trying to manipulate whoever they can seduce with their ideology and their fear-mongering into constantly acquiring more weapons of murdering people because it's patriotic and because freedom. Now, we talk about guns often on the show, and I get very inaccurately accused of wanting to take all the guns away. Never have I ever, dear friends, advocated for that. Ever. There's something inherently wrong with one group of people forcing the government to take something away from another group of people. And we can go back throughout history. Now, the irony is that the gun lobby and the gun fetishists are convinced that that's what the government's coming out to do. The irony is that this fear-mongering has been shouted from the rooftops for 40 plus years, 50 years now. Okay? And other than the assault weapons ban that only lasted 10 years, during which, quite factually, assault weapons incidences dropped dramatically, there was no great disarming of everyone. Everyone still could buy guns. Everyone could still own as many guns as they wanted to. They just couldn't buy assault weapons, military-style assault weapons. Now, the absurdity of that is that their claim there, to wrap up this tangent, is that they need military-grade machines of war because they need to be able to defend themselves against the tyranny of the left. Now, while there's obvious problematic issues on the left, I am not, and never have been, a blind defender of either political party, thank you very much. There's no evidence that I can see anywhere that the American people want the government to do anything more than establish security protocols that are quite similar to, wait for it, what the right wants to do about voting. Which prompts a huge question. Where's that note? This is a really simple question that you should ask if you have Republican, right-leaning, conservative friends who are activists or outspoken about issues. Ask them this. Why is it that the GOP and the right thinks that voter ID, intrusive verification measures, which seem to, in the way that they are implemented by red states, impact minorities the most in a negative fashion? Why is it those are desperately needed to regulate voting despite a total absence of any real evidence of the much fear-mongered, quote-unquote, nationwide voter fraud efforts? But conversely, and seemingly irrationally, they are wildly indignant and outraged at the idea of regulating gun ownership with safety protocols like background checks, licensing, etc. It's fascinating, isn't it? The party of big government, the party that is, not big government, the party of anti-big government is curiously only anti-big government about the things that they feel they should have unbridled access to. But then suddenly, quite bizarrely, becomes pro-big government when it comes to issues that they want to prevent other people from having access to. I mean, if what happened with the Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade is not categorically, by definition, big government overreach, I don't know what is. Though we can put a pin in that. We've talked about it before, and I'm sure we'll have to talk about it again. So, it's fascinating, truly fascinating. But of course, the GOP is really heavily leaning into being the body of personified hypocrisy. I mean, they're the self-proclaimed party of family values, and yet they adulate and adore Donald Trump, a man who has consecutively, serially cheated on his wives with the women he marries next so he can cheat on them with the next woman he marries. How on earth, like, that's the very first thing, I'm like, how on earth does Donald Trump, this is one of my first questions from the very beginning, when he announced that he alone could fix it. How on earth does Donald Trump embody the proclaimed family, social, and political values that the GOP pretends to be about? Oh, wait, that's the answer, isn't it? It's just pretense. It's a pretense. There's so many levels of hypocrisy, it's amazing. Not the least of which is this disparity between their desire to enforce cumbersome voter registration laws, constantly purging voter rolls unnecessarily, and invoking big government mechanisms and encouraging vigilantism when, they're so adamantly opposed to similar yet more restrained protocols when it comes to gun safety. Zero evidence of an organized nationwide voter fraud problem. And let's be really, really clear, friends. Trump's own investigations found nothing. 60-plus court cases were lost because of a profound lack of evidence. And I mean, the ultimate irony, I have it somewhere as my note, is that, Trump himself, after vilifying and fear-mongering about how corrupt mail-in voting is supposed to be, Trump himself used a mail-in voting ballot and handed it over to, God forbid, a mule on both elections. In, his two big presidential elections, he voted by mail early using mules. And this has been proven, confirmed. Public records have confirmed. Investigative journalists have found the voting records that indicate that Trump voted by mail and that a third party delivered it to his polling station. GOP has been the party of hypocrisy for as long as they've been claiming to follow the teachings of Christ and yet do everything in the opposite direction. But we've already done plenty of episodes about that. I think one of the things that cannot be denied, and this is, a singular point of interest that must be explored deeply, not only in the current moment, but also moving forward, and as we look back on our history, Trump has perfected and hyper-normalized what I call implausible denialism. Now, you all have probably heard the idea of plausible deniability, right? It's one of those things that's often used as a plot point or a gimmick in movies about politics or about, corruption. I think my most recent funny example is from Avenue 5, where on multiple occasions the guy who owns the space liner is like, oh, this is plausible deniability, right? Okay, yeah, that's right. No, I didn't say that, etc. Trump has perfected and hypernormalized something worse, which is a denialism of things that are just impossible to deny. Not the least of which is that he lost the election. All right, friends, let's take a moment to cleanse the palate, put on some DJ Zed music, and come back and talk about Trump's big announcement that he made just days/weeks after the Trump organization was found guilty on 17 counts of conspiracy and fraud. Because the next big thing that he did is continuing to be so absurd. And like I point out, he stinks of griftiness. So let's purge for a hot second and listen to Nebula Remix Live Cosmic Whispers, a DJ Zed loop audio digital track entertainment for your pleasure of listening. You are listening to the digital robot rock dance music known as Discotheque Synthetica, infamous from the many dimensions of the Zeppoverse. If you enjoy this digital music here on the podcast, please be sure to head on over to soundcloud.com/Mr. Zeppo to enjoy the hottest hits from DJ Zed and I, without the interruption of me rambling through parts of them and then, transitioning back into the show. Every time you go and listen, you help support the multitude of content creation projects that is the Zeppoverse. If you'd like to explore the many other dimensions of the Zeppoverse beyond just the digital robot rock music known as Discotheque Synthetica, head on over to solo.to/Mr. Zeppo and give yourself a self-guided tour of the many dimensions of the Zeppoverse. There's digital art and some rambling writings, as well as video game live streaming and much more. All right, friends, let's fade out the old DJ Zed and come on back to what we were talking about. So, from day one, and people accuse me, and forgive me if I'm a broken record here, but people have accused me, Trump supporters have accused me, as they do many others, of suffering from Trump derangement syndrome. But I'm sorry, I never built a golden statue to the man. I never blindly bought into the idea that he is the second coming of Jesus Christ himself. Who's deranged, yo? The people who openly, honestly, earnestly ask questions about a man who behaves as though he believes himself to be some sort of mafia don? Or those who shower him with blind loyalty and adoration despite his obvious corruptions and problematic issues, without question, without batting an eye, and then bend over backwards to rationalize, defend, and attack all those who would critique him. Like, who's deranged? I don't think I'm deranged. I think I've been consistent. Trump's public behavior, his words and his actions, as have been documented by, and I'm not even talking about the news, but court documentation over the last multiple decades, leads one to conclude this guy is not above board. You can put it as politely as you want, but the fact that he's had to pay back and he's had to shut down and pay back the money from, I think, multiple charities, and the fact that the inauguration parade and the debacle around how much money he raised and how little it apparently cost, that alone should have opened the eyes of those who were enthusiastic about him becoming president. Now, here we are, several years later, and what does Trump do after the Trump Organization is convicted of 17 counts of conspiracy to fraud, or conspiracy, and fraud, because they were separate cases, separate counts. What does he do? He teases a big important announcement, which prompted a 24-hour news media cycle and gossiping cycle of speculating what was he going to do, and the speculation ranged from like the sort of we've speculated about this before to the absolutely ridiculous. But his announcement was, it was nothing anyone expected on the left or the right, and it just, I don't know, it's like a crowning gem on his pile of absurdity. But he's announced that he's selling vis-a-vis third parties who own the licensing, because he's not even doing it directly, right? I guess he can't now that the Trump organization's been found guilty of 17 counts of conspiracy and fraud. And I keep hammering that home because I think that the Trump base needs to understand that. The family-owned business of Donald J. Trump has been found guilty by a court of law. And I think, now, this hasn't been the case 100% of the time, but in the last 2 years of court cases, a huge portion of the cases he's lost have been cases before judges that he and his party appointed. So there's glimmers of hope. Now, but his big announcement was a sad and obvious cash grab. I mean, there's an old saying, strike while the iron's hot. Do you think that the NFT trading market is currently iron hot right now? I don't know. I wouldn't think so. As someone who tried to dabble and try to get into the NFT market, I realized it was kind of already oversaturated 3 years ago. There's too many people minting too many NFTs and not enough wealthy buyers to satisfy the offerings on the marketplace. But here's the thing. Now, I don't know. I was having a conversation with an acquaintance of mine, a real life acquaintance of mine, on social media about the fine print on the website that is selling these NFT quote unquote trading cards. Now, the thing about this announcement is, well, his announcement has nothing to do with his third attempt at running for office. His announcement wasn't any of the wild and crazy things that people were speculating. His announcement was a product pitch. And of all the products he's tried to sell with his name on it, ranging from, clothing lines made in China. Mind you, almost all the MAGA hats are still, I think, made in China. If that's changed, I apologize. But as of the last time I tried to verify it, they were made in China. But his clothing line, his ties, he's tried to sell Trump booze. He's tried to sell Trump steaks. Oof. They all waffle and fold after the necessary crash grab happens. Okay, so two fascinating realities about the Trump quote-unquote collectible trading cards. One, he only just made the announcement, 3 days ago? And the website's already claiming that they're sold out. Now, technically, that's not possible. No, because it's totally artificial scarcity, right? There's no way that they've sold out of JPEGs because they're infinitely replicatable. Now, I get it. I understand how NFT works. Non-fungible tokens. You have to attach the image or digital product, whatever it is, to a unique identifier code that's built into the blockchain. I understand blockchain and all of that enough to get that creates literally artificial scarcity out of something that is infinitely repeatable, right? Because now you've taken an easily, I could have I don't know if they've got screen grab protections, and I wasn't about to try because then I'm already flirting with something that's less than honorable. But not that I wouldn't have, but I didn't care. But when I went to go look at the website, they had them all on display. I easily could have screen grabbed them to then sell my own altered and totally bogus Donald Trump NFT trading cards. But never mind that part of it, because that's just how NFTs work, right? That's literally how it works. You take an image, which you can infinitely duplicate, attach it to something that's built into the blockchain, an ID number, essentially. And then you've created artificial scarcity because what you're really selling is the blockchain node, right? And that's attached to the image. All right. No, but the absurdity is that he chose to call them collectible trading cards. Now, did he actually mastermind all this? It doesn't seem like it, not based on the available evidence on the website. But that's a whole different point, right? The choice was made either by Trump or whoever is that is licensing his name and image. And there's a bunch of fun disclaimer content on the website, which I'm going to get to. One of the highlights I'm going to get to in just a hot second. But they decided to frame it in this way, collectible trading cards. Now, if these were physical objects, then there would be real scarcity. Okay? And that scarcity would be impacted by how collectible people treat the objects. As someone who was once suckered into the gimmick of collectible baseball trading cards, I realized that the glamour and allure of the cards swelling in value over time is mostly sales marketing nonsense, right? The vast majority of trading cards never become $1 million items. Some do, and it's got more to do with, what happens to that individual sport baller's career and what, how famous they become, et cetera, et cetera. And of course the variables of how many instances of the card are published and sold, how many instances of the card survive everyday wear and tear in mint condition, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you can argue that with a physical, tangible object, there's a real opportunity to create, scarcity-driven, upwardly mobile value attached to the object in question. A rookie card of a really famous baseballer is going to have some value over time, especially if they went on to become really important or really famous or score a lot of baseball points. But when it comes to NFTs, the perceived value is even more ephemeral and nonsensical because it's a digital object whose scarcity is being artificially created by having it attached to this blockchain through an individuated identification code. Now, it would be an issue for a court of law to decide whether or not it was misleading to sell them this way. But in their defense, if you go to the website and read the fine print, which is both sporadically scattered throughout all the sales, the sales points of the thing, but there's also a huge, big, long, rambling terms and condition thing. They go out of their, and this is the hilarious part to me, and this I can tell you, I went to the website myself. I'm not just repeating someone else's claim. I went to the website myself out of curiosity to take a look, and it's like whoever is selling the cards goes really out of their way to say, like, these are not investment vehicles. They have no intrinsic value. We do not guarantee anything. And it's totally on you if you buy it and the NFT never fluctuates in value or fluctuates and loses value, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the second thing that's really weird, so that's, I posted a thing on social media. I'm like, wow, the disclaimers in the fine print, hilarious. And I posted a follow-up question. I'm like, the question is, will they, the supporters of Trump, even bother reading that? Some snarky, this is the thing I was talking about with my acquaintance. Someone commented back, like a pretty disparaging comment about, can they even read? Of course, most Trump-supporting Republicans can read. If they couldn't, they wouldn't be able to troll everyone else on the internet as fervently as they do. The question is, do they want to read the details of the fine print and legal disclaimers in the terms and conditions, right? And in all fairness, How many people on the left read the legally binding contract of the EULA, the end user license agreement, for any of the social media platforms that they use? Like, this is not a partisan issue. Human beings don't really care about reading fine print. They'll just skip it. It's easier than actually reading it. And then the irony there is that companies know that, which is why they use legalese jargon and big, long, boring boilerplates, so that it's like overwhelmingly tedious to read, and then you can kind of bank on the vast majority of readers or users just clicking I agree without bothering to read it. I'm obviously guilty of that. There's no way I'd still be reading if I read every single EULA that I've ever encountered. But now the reason that I'm so into EULAs is that I used to work in the video game industry. If you've ever watched any of my live game streaming, you may have caught that point. I'd like to talk about it every once in a while. I was a quality assurance tester, and one of the things we had to do as part of our job was proofread the EULA in the game. So EULAs are fascinating beasts, and one of the things that most people complaining about their favorite social media platforms and outrageously claiming that they're being censored or that they're being, that their free speech rights are being violated, they just never fucking bothered to read the legally binding contract that they agreed to. Now, we can go off on a whole huge tangent about free speech. I will say this. It is totally within the free market capitalism, free speech rights, and free business venture rights of Donald Trump and whatever business partners he's now dealing with to produce such a ridiculous product and sell it. I'm not saying that he couldn't have or shouldn't have. It's still a free market, right? Now, what's hilarious though is the free marketeers will blast people for not understanding how the free market works, but then completely throw out everything about the free market when something's not what they want it to be. That's a whole nother episode. There's a whole video gaming issue going on right now that I really want to talk about. But put a pin on the corkboard. We'll talk about it in a crossover episode of the podcast and the game streaming content. And of course, I'll be talking about it in the game streaming content. But, there's a lot of leeway in the quote-unquote free market. But one of the things here that people forget is that in the free market is that you're free to do what you think is best, and you're also free to fail. So there's that. But stepping back to the free speech issue, just to reference a pre-existing pin on the corkboard, free speech has never been speech without consequences. Okay? And this bears repeating because there's so many people out there screaming about free speech and simultaneously demanding that others shut up. And unfortunately, that's, I guess, fair play within free speech. Free speech protects the public political discourse of an individual and allows them to say just about any ridiculous, absurd, vile thing, as long as it does not cross certain lines. To the best of my understanding, free speech does not protect the issuing of death threats. Free speech does not protect the incitement of violence. Free speech does not protect fraud. If it did, the Trump organization wouldn't have just been convicted of 17 counts of fraud. So free speech, absolutely. Free speech in the free market, freedoms at all, because there's more than one issue here involved, but it totally protects Trump's right to sell whatever ridiculous product. If Trump wanted to sell sex toys molded out of his own genitalia, he absolutely could. And oh my God, I wouldn't be surprised if he did it. And I wouldn't be surprised if there was a relatively huge market for it within his own base. I'm actually surprised he hasn't done that. Either on his own anatomy or that of, but that's a whole, sorry, that was just a gross direction. I don't even know why I started going down there, but I'm gonna laugh my ass off if that's a thing sometime in the next year or two, or if it already is and I just haven't come across it. Oh, good Lord! You know what? You know that one rule, that one like crazy urban myth rule about porn, right? If you can imagine it, there's already porn out there about it. I can totally imagine Trump licensed porn and sex toys. And bless it, this is America. He absolutely could. It can also, it should, if something like that should also be the last straw, the final straw that really breaks the political will and, you know, of his supporters' backs and just like makes him a laughingstock. But, I mean, he survived so many things that so many of us thought, hoped, and wished would be the final straw. But okay, so back to this thing. He's selling these trading cards. And okay, many people have already beat me to the punchline of stand-up comedy about it, and I don't claim to be a stand-up comedian. I'm funny in person. You want to have a funny conversation, it'll happen. But like stand-up comedy, I've never formally or officially tried to do that. It's on my bucket list. But I also have no idea how I would do stand-up comedy. But I digress. Plenty of stand-up comedy is already being had about the cards, their design, how they depict them, how the cards are depicting Trump. The speech that he reads, that he's clearly reading off a teleprompter. I forget who it was. It was either Stephen Colbert or Seth Meyers that called out that it looks like he was literally reading that script for the first time in the commercial. It didn't sound like he'd ever rehearsed it or read it before the film, like the camera started rolling. I mean, especially there's a moment where he improvs a line because there's a prize associated to this sale. If you buy an NFT Trump trading card, which ironically I don't know, well, there's the whole issue about whether or not they're really trading cards or not. But there, somewhere in the commercial, he said there's a prize associated to it. There's apparently going to be a raffle drawing to win admittance to some sort of gala dinner, some sort of event where you can sit down and eat at Trump's table, presumably at Mar-a-Lago. But he went off script and said, I don't know if that's such a great prize or not, but it's the prize we've got. And I'm paraphrasing, obviously. And I'm not even trying to do a Trump impersonation or a Trump impression. But he literally said that amidst this rambling, bizarrely paced, herky-jerky, read of off the teleprompter. Now, I'm not here to try and come up off the top of my head with more funny things to say about that, but it is absurd. It is also worth calling out that he states, as he introduces the cards, that the images on the card depict him in the many glorious stages of his career. Now, that wasn't an exact wording, but I mean, again, I'm very terribly paraphrasing. But he does say that the images are from different phases of his career. And of course, that's blatantly false. Hyperbolic at best, because he's depicted as a spaceman, like an astronaut. He's depicted as a cowboy. He's depicted as a superhero, with laser beam eyes, and a bunch of other things that, have categorically never happened in his life. But I digress. I think the biggest issue is that he's, hawking them as valuable. He's selling them they are $90, $99 each. Okay. $99 NFT. Second, they're randomly generated, apparently. And this is something I gleaned from both the commentary about the fine print on the website and my own, taking a gander at the website itself and reading it. I will not pretend to claim to read every single word on the website. I didn't. But I did go spend a few minutes and sort of dip my foot into the cesspool to okay, let's look at some of this fine print. They go out of their way, the website goes out of their way to repeatedly say this is not intended to be an investment vehicle. which is, of course, exactly how every NFT is marketed, right? The NFT is worth $99 because it's obviously going to go up in value. Now, it's absurd to me that they're like, it's just meant to be for personal entertainment as a collectible. Now, the problem there is collectibles traditionally have a secondary market, right? You buy them from the manufacturers. Like, let's think of what are traditional collectibles? Remember the Beanie Baby phase? Is that what they were called? Little beanbag toys shaped in different critters and creatures and people and whatnot. They were all the craze because they were adorable and collectible. Now, I could be wrong, but I would, to the best of my cultural and you know, sort of personal understanding, collectibles are collectibles because you're sort of in a long-term competition with everyone else to keep them in the best possible shape so that their value goes up and that others who missed out on the limited edition Beanie Baby Trump doll in the initial, you know, release of them will want to buy them at a higher price point later on in time. So they're selling them using this term, but also warning you that they should not be considered an investment vehicle. Okay. Now, I don't think that that's in and of itself fraudulent. I don't think. But it is like the whole thing seems to be flirting right up on the edge of a grift, right? Snake oil salesmanship in its digital finest. Because I really, really doubt that their value is ever going to go up. Who knows? I could be wrong. It's a personal assessment of mine. I have baseball cards sitting in a box somewhere that never went up in value, right? But that I was told I should be collected back in the day when I was a kid and sort of enamored with the idea of this whole concept of collectible trading cards. Now, so what makes it suspicious AF to me is that they're irrelevant to the current moment politically, right? Completely irrelevant. Got nothing to do with political policy. The images literally have nothing to do with any of his political achievements or his real world personal achievements. He was never an astronaut. He was never a cowboy. He never had laser beam eyes, right? So they're a purely fantastical comic book like set of NFT images, and the legal disclaimers on those website portals selling them is like, we cannot guarantee that these will go up in value. It's totally your risk if you buy them with the intent of them going up in value. And according to some of the other fine print, they're described as randomly generated with no guarantee that you won't get multiple duplicates. Now, I know Colbert did a funny bit about that, right? Like, so you're going to keep, how many times are you going to buy $99 digital images in hopes that you can complete the collection? That sounds pretty grifty to me. That's exactly the kind of thing I would never put my money into. Because, you know, even with halfway decent luck, you're going to end up with multiple instances of several of the same cards, and you may never get a single instance of some of the others. In theory, that's how the NFT blockchain system is going to create some amount of scarcity. But the other part that's absurd to me is that when I went there, and it was only announced 3 days ago, maybe 4 at the max. I haven't been checking the days off on my calendar about it or anything, but it's been less than a week, and they've already quote unquote sold out. Now, there's varying numbers being reported and talked about on social media about how many were sold, but it seems like a minimal amount of money was acquired in the sale, and now they're no longer available. You can still apparently enter the sweepstakes drawing to win that glorious dinner with him at Mar-a-Lago. But the thing that makes it suspicious to me is that it came out of nowhere. It reeks of just, cheap carnal salesmanship like Trump steak did back in the day when he was trying to sell people Trump-branded meat, which of course went nowhere and disappeared and fizzled almost immediately. And it's the very first thing that he did after this tremendous legal decision against the Trump organization. So it reminds me very much of the Stop the Steal fundraiser, right? Based on misleading, if not outright false claims of X, Y, and Z, and of, which leads me to a completely different question. And I know that we can, transition away from the trading card things, but why now these totally irrelevant trading cards? Why are they suddenly sold out? Who bought them all? And where is the money going? Where is the money really going? Where did the money go? Where did the money for the inauguration parade really go? It didn't go to the parade. But kind of backtracking from those questions, it serves, I realize that it's sort of distracting from a much more important question. We can get into a big, discussion about these trading cards and what it means and why he's doing it and where's the money going to go, et cetera, but it's irrelevant. It's, other than it potentially, becoming a fraudulent business venture, which I'm not accusing it of that. I'm just saying it's shady at best, and it stinks of griftism. It stinks of I'm selling you fake watches and hyping you about how valuable this watch is going to be. Go get it appraised. I've got this. It's like people on the street selling fake Rolexes. Why do they sell you fake Rolexes really cheap? Because either they're fake and you just want a cheap trinket that looks like a Rolex, or you think it's real and you're buying it for a steal and you're going to be able to get it appraised and resold later for much, much more. But stepping back from that, right? Because, again, it just all stinks of smokescreen. The real question that should be asked of the Trump base and of Trump supporters and of Trump political acolytes and the GOP itself is if, and here's the, it's a big if question that I've got, and I've been asking for quite some time now, but I'll ask it again. If Trump and his legal team really had verifiable, confirmable evidence to back up any of the outlandish legal claims that they've been making since they categorically lost the election, why haven't they presented it? For reals? They've done a bunch of press conferences where they promised to tell us about it. And of course, they've referenced a bunch of questionable material on the internet. But they have not, to the best of my knowledge, actually presented a well-organized, publicly accessible report, right? They haven't. They just haven't. They've promised to do so. They've announced they're going to do so. And then they've gone to court and have been shut down for failing to present any real viable evidence. In 60 plus some odd different cases. So where is it? Now, conversely, no matter how much disparagement they've thrown at the January 6th committee, the January 6th Congressional Investigation Committee has literally tracked down witnesses, gotten testimony, acquired verifiable documents that are evidence. Like, they've put together actual evidence. And they're going to present it this upcoming Monday in a publicly accessible and apparently, supposedly, mostly transparent report that's going to lay out every piece of important evidence and testimony that they've collected during the course of their prolonged investigation. If Trump and his team really had uncontrovertible proof, why haven't they done the same? Why isn't there a report? Why haven't they made criminal referrals or oversight referrals to the appropriate authorities the way the January 6th committee is apparently about to do this upcoming Monday, right? They've had all the time in the world. And to the best of my understanding, the Trump team has basically been blowing smoke and gaslighting people. And have yet to actually produce verifiable evidence that backs up their absurd sounding claims. Right now, instead of these really ridiculous looking quote unquote trading cards, Trump could have dropped a massive report, right? An independent investigation with testimony and verifiable evidence and sources so that people can go through that and confirm it. And so that the appropriate authorities, they can go like, here you go, DOJ, right? He was lit. The biggest irony, the greatest ridiculousness of the Trump era presidency was that he campaigned on locking the Clintons and various other people up and then literally did nothing about it. There was nothing in the public record to indicate that Trump did anything reasonable or outlandish to actually bring about law enforcement efforts to investigate, indict, and arrest the Clintons and everybody else that he was going to arrest. Right? There were things he and the administration and his supporters in Congress could have done within the bounds of the law. Now they're saber-rattling and talking about doing that now. As soon as the GOP regains the slim majority that they're going to get in whichever chamber of Congress that they're going to get it in, because I get them confused because I'm dyslexic, and also their names are just kind of silly. But they're going to investigate the Biden family. They're going to investigate the Clintons. They're going to investigate. And I'm like, sure, let them. Because, I'm old enough to remember the last great, big, mind-blowing investigation. You guys all remember Benghazi? How many times? How many different inquiries? How many different congressional oversight hearings? How many different separate investigations? It was Benghazi for God knows how long. And what came of it? A big, fat nothing burger. Because the GOP especially in its current form, loves to threaten investigations about stuff that they probably already know they're not going to find anything about. Trump's own obviously willing to bend over and backwards and exaggerate and fib Department of Justice guy, what's his name, Bill Barr, had to stop his own shenanigans and be like, sorry, bro, found nothing. I literally found nothing. Okay? So what did they do? Instead of going, oh, wow, our go-to guy found nothing, we better just own up to it, they just threw him under the bus. And now the Trump base is convinced that he's a deep state, turncoat or whatever. But that's what they always do. When Michael Cohen testified against Trump in the case that should have broke the camel's back, boom. Instantly. Just irrationally. The guy's deep state turncoat. He's always been there to throw him under the bus. What? Okay. So here we are. The 2024 presidential election cycle has unofficially already been kicked off with Trump's previous announcement that he's going to run. Although, curiously, he's, not doing anything or saying anything about it since then. The January 6th committee is about to drop a massive report that's going to put the Mueller report to shame. Right? And mind you, the Mueller report, despite all of Bill Barr's bullshit, which the Trump base immediately started parroting, was pretty clear about what it found and what it could confirm. And it was not, in any way, shape, or form, exculpative or what's the word? It did not. What did Trump claim? Quite absurdly, that the Mueller report completely. The word's failing to come up. I can almost see the shape of it. It did not indemnify. He claimed that he was completely, proven innocent by the Mueller report. And the only reason that works, that Trump's, whenever Trump does that sort of thing, is because the base will just blindly take his word for it instead of bothering to read the thing. Like, during the Mueller era, I kept asking them, are you going to read the report? Did you read the report? And I'm talking about Trump, acolytes and Trump supporters and Trump believers that I have in my social media circles for whatever reason, because they tend to love to add me because they perceive me quite inaccurately as a lib that they control and own, that they can own, right? Not that they can control. Not control, but troll. They're out there to be trolls, and they see me as a troll-worthy libtard to come and own. Now, ironically, I'm not a leftist. Now, I've been called a liar for that, because I criticize Trump. I must be a leftist. I must be a deranged Antifa leftist because I criticize Trump. I must blindly defend the tyranny of the blue party because I critique Trump. No, I'm just critiquing Trump because it really chaps my hide that he has associated himself with Christ in the way that he has. But that's a whole nother talking point, because that's the same critique I've had with the GOP for decades. We've had an episode about that sort of thing. I've talked about it in other episodes as it becomes, tangentially connected, and I'm sure I'll come back and talk about it again. But I digress. This upcoming Monday is undoubtedly going to be a fascinating day. And I humbly encourage everyone who knows a Trump supporter to ask that Trump supporter in your life if they are going to or have bothered to read the January 6th committee's report, if they've bothered to have watched the committee hearings so far. Now, obviously, most of us who have Trump supporters in our lives, either directly or indirectly on social media or in our families or whatever, everyone out there is probably already accustomed to the knee-jerk response, which is to laugh, mock, and ridicule and reject the possibility that such content is even worth reading. That's their go-to response. Is that what critical thinking is? That's my follow-up question. Oh, is that what critical thinking looks like? Blindly regurgitating one side's talking points and never bothering to read and investigate and analyze and open-mindedly assess and contemplate the other side's findings? I don't think so. Not in my book. But here we are, right? So, and that's what I mean by like implausible nihilism. They would rather insist that everyone who criticizes Trump is a deep state robot, a lizard being from another dimension, or some other outlandish, dehumanizing, objectifying, finger-pointing claim than to read the content being presented and thinking through it. Now, that isn't me championing the left, right? I'm just saying, if you're going to consume Donald Trump's claims, blindly agree with them, and then begin to regurgitate them, you cannot pretend that you're a critical thinker. Don't wave that critical thinking flag. Don't scream about doing the research if all you're really doing is on blind faith and personal loyalty believing what Trump claims. I mean, the same goes for the left, yo. But I mean, it's the Don, the self-proclaimed king of the Republicans. A man who literally just tweeted recently that he thinks the Constitution should be destroyed by setting it aside and just throwing it away so he can be reinstated as president. How does that make sense, yo? How do you pretend to be the party of the Constitution and then give blind loyalty to a man who has proven that he doesn't even understand how the Constitution works through his words and his actions? We must keep asking these real questions to those who give their blind faith loyalty to Donald Trump. Conversely, dear friends, we must do that in the other direction as well. But right now, it's quite clear to me, and the reason I'm so focused, the reason I host a special segment in my podcast series called Good Morning Trumptopia is because Trump has garnered enough power to be the most outlandish and absurd and cartoonish, but very real existential threat to the flawed, fragile, and yes, long before Trump came around, critically corrupt and riddled with problematic issues democracy that we live in. I don't pretend to be an expert, friends, and I also don't pretend to be an American exceptionalist. I love this country because I love all countries. I love this. I love this place because, despite its flaws, it's full of wonder and hope and potential. But I try to keep my eyes open. I try to keep my thinking clear, and I try to avoid just falling in line with whatever else is saying. Now, I'm constantly accused of being, a left-wing media sheeple by right-wing media regurgitators of right-wing media talking points. We must question everything, right? We must investigate everything, but we must do it with equally applied standards and veracity. We must investigate without falling into the pit trap, the ego traps of real political witch huntery. And that's the thing. Trump always accuses the other people, everyone else who's against him, anyone who disagrees with him, of doing exactly what he's doing. Right? What is a real witch hunt? By definition, when you falsely accuse and persecute someone of something you're not even bothering to prove. That's what he did. Now, I'm not defending the Clintons, but he didn't investigate them. He made outlandish and bizarre claims and never proved them. What he perpetuated during his run into office and the first several years of office was literally, categorically, by definition, a political witch hunt. He used it to gain political power. He used it to fascinate, potential voters that didn't like the Clintons and win their support. And then he did nothing about it. Absolutely nothing about it. He could have used the legitimate channels of political investigatory oversight, which, he claims that the left is putting the thumb on the scale. But to the best of my ability to observe, they're not, right? Like, when has Joe Biden ever made a huge speech about locking Donald Trump up? I'm not aware of any such speech making, and I'm not aware of any such demands of personal loyalty from political figures and law enforcement officials, akin to what Trump has literally done. He demanded, what's his name? And they made a whole movie about it, it's like way too soon, guys. There's some other, I just discovered a whole other TV show about Trump. I'm like, oh God, it's way too soon. We're still living it. Why do we need movies about it now? Those movies should come out 10 years from now. And that's the worst part. Is like 10 years from now, there's going to be a whole spew of movies and miniseries and docudramas about this episode. And it's going to be tedious for those of us who live through it. But I digress. I don't hate the man, and I have to say this all the time because it's the number one thing that I get accused of. Your hate for Trump is deranging your mind. I'm like, no, I don't hate the guy. I just cannot comprehend how anyone who actually questions the world around them, anyone who actually does a little bit of an attempt to investigate and confirm things, how anyone in their right mind can continue, let alone pick up the support in the first place, but can continue to blindly support the guy and bend over backwards to defend him at every turn when he does things that are clearly corrupt or inappropriate or hypocritical or just downright absurd. Now, the big question that we face and that hopefully will be answered on Monday is how far will the January 6th investigation committee, the oversight committee, go? They have the legal right and power to make criminal referrals to the DOJ, right? That's something that the Republicans in Congress had the capacity to do the entire time Trump was in office. They didn't, in regards to the completely broken promise to lock the Clintons up. So, and of course, there's been much speculation and much water cooler talk about whether or not they will. The January 6th committee, whether or not they will make criminal indictment referrals to the DOJ or to other bodies of the system, because there's plenty of other options they've got. They can make recommendations to the disciplinary committee of the bar for any of the lawyers involved in all of this, and there are plenty. And the lawyers should have known better. And there's clear and confirmable evidence that they did. One of them, I forget his name right now, forgive me, I don't have the quote in front of me, literally texted the rest of the Trump team and said, this is not legal, we could all go to jail for it. Giuliani said something to the effect, too. To that effect. That, if there's one thing we could all go to jail for, is this. Will the January 6th committee go so far as to make a criminal referral about Trump himself? We don't know, because as the speculation has explored, there is concern, which is valid, that such a referral will just be an excuse for the GOP, the Trump base, and Trump himself to quadruple down on the "it's all a political witch hunt" claim, even though it's perfectly within their oversight jurisdiction to make such referrals. The irony being that Team Trump never bothered. They never bothered. There's nothing in the public record that would indicate they ever tried to implement any kind of investigation regarding any of the many claims that they made, during the run-up to the election when he first, ran for office, to uphold the promises of holding the left accountable to whatever imagined, corruption that they were using as fear-mongering talking points. If they meant what they claimed back in the day, why didn't they use the legitimate tools at their disposal? Why did they only continue to chant the chant and make the promise without ever actually following through? The other big question about what's going to happen on Monday is, will the Trump base bother to read the freaking report? Please, oh please, if you know Trump supporters, ask them, encourage them, invite them, challenge them, dare them, double dog dare them. Read the report and then tear it apart from the inside. I was just having a discussion which echoes and resonates with this with a friend about a completely unrelated thing. And it's ironic because, generally we agree on stuff, this acquaintance of mine and I, but I posted something about some content that I found fascinating. Never made a claim of belief, never asked other people to believe it, never said other people were wrong for not believing it. And this acquaintance of mine came down hard. They sounded like a Trumptopian. They sounded like someone more interested in playground bully tactics, name-calling, and ridiculing than having an open-minded discussion about the actual content itself. So it's not a partisan issue. People on all sides of the political ideological spectrum get caught up. Why? Because that is an age-old ego trap. Come in with disparagement. Come in with, character flaws. Come in with other people's claims which you haven't verified, and then mock, ridicule, and objectify, dehumanize the individual you're discussing, the individual you're arguing against, instead of earnestly, genuinely, sincerely, with an open mind, and with your real critical thinking hat on, discuss the content itself. And that's going to be the thing I want to see about the January 6th committee and the report that's about to drop. Now, the big problematic issue that I see moving forward from that is, okay, the report drops. Everybody who doesn't support Trump is going to read it or sort of realize that they don't really need to because they've already seen most of the hearings and they're on board, right? I'm not worried about whether or not the left reads the report, but I'm also not going to be surprised if the left is the biggest consumer of the report. I'm concerned about the Trump base that categorically rejects the very idea of reading the report, despite waving the critical thinking badge or banner, and despite claiming that they, quote-unquote, do the research, and that they, quote-unquote, and I've had this said to me on multiple occasions by multiple people, I confirm everything. From your living room? From your desk at home? From the internet? You confirm everything on the internet? That's not how it works, folks. To quote-unquote confirm a thing, you have to go to the place where it happened. You have to talk to the witnesses involved. You have to directly and personally examine whatever forensic evidence is actually available. So, the vast majority of people making that claim don't understand what they're saying, or hypocritically don't give a fuck that they know they're just bullshitting. For the record, I've never claimed to quote unquote do all the research. I've always been really clear. This is my assessment based on my limited ability to read and see what other people have said about the whatever claim. All right. So here we are, friends. This is truly a pivotal moment in Trumptopian history, in the history of the Trump era. Because either this effort from the left will waffle, right? Because like Charlie Brown falling for Lucy, pulling the ball every time he goes to kick it, they're going to just stumble all over themselves. And that's my innocent read on it. I'm also the guy that's constantly hashtagging 2 wings, 1 bird. I don't know for sure, but I may have been one of the earliest adopters and propagators of hashtag 2 wings, 1 bird. One of my most deepest concerns from back in the Reagan era is that despite all the foam at the mouth, despite all the clawing at each other's jugular, at the top, at the political party level, at the leadership level, they literally do work together, right? And when we know about it and when it makes sense, we applaud it as bipartisanship, and we in fact hope that they aspire towards that. We want the two political parties invested in civilized public discourse and in working together towards solving problems. Now, problematically, though, they seem to be, from my perspective, as an observer, an independent, nonpartisan, open-minded observer that knows that I am not capable of physically confirming everything myself to the degree at which that most, blind faith supporters claim that they do, which I find phenomenally unbelievable because that would require so much money, right, to go there, to re-interview. That's why we are, unfortunately, in the world we live in today, we have to take some amount of trust in those who do investigate, who do go and interview the witnesses, and do go to where things happened and investigate the forensic evidence. And then question that. We can't just take it on blind faith either, right? Like, I'm not going to take the January 6th committee's findings on blind faith. I'm going to do my best to read through the report, to listen to the hearing, and think it through for myself. And then consider what the detractors are saying to see if anything they bring up seems valid. But my big concern is moving forward, it's going to drop. The report's going to drop. The Republicans and the Trumptopians, both the political players and the bases, are going to dismiss it all and refuse to read it and mock and ridicule and vilify it. And then, the machines of political justice machinery of political justice will continue to grind away at it. And at some point, especially if they make criminal referrals to the DOJ, and mind you, let's be really clear about those criminal referrals. They're technically meaningless. Anybody, to the best of my understanding, anybody can write a letter to the DOJ and call it a criminal referral. You're just saying, hey, DOJ, I'm concerned. Here's the reasons why. Please do your own independent investigation about it. And to the best of my ability to discern, there's plenty of evidence that the DOJ has been investigating for as long as, if not longer, than the January 6th committee has. So the real big concern I have is what happens down the road after the criminal referral, after the DOJ continues to finalize their own investigations, which have been happening in tandem and separate from the January 6th committee. And what happens when actual criminal indictments start to drop? Will they indict a former president who is once again running for office? And make no mistake, That is why Trump announced so absurdly early. Sorry for the object strike. I was emphatically gesticulating with my hands and tapped the desk there. Apologize. That's why he announced so freaking early. Because he, quite inaccurately, in my assessment, seems to believe that being a candidate indemnifies him, completely shields him from criminal investigation. I don't think that that's true, but I'm fairly certain that he's, cajoled his followers into believing that is true, in part so that should an indictment come down between now and that window of time, which the DOJ itself has an unwritten rule about, which is why that's the source of the spun web, fantasy that being a candidate is like a political shield from indictment, right? There is an unstated, sort of cultural norm in the DOJ, which we're constantly told about and explained by the DOJ itself, that they prefer not to take overt criminal indictment actions. I forget the exact window of time. I think it might be 90 days or 160 days, something limited like that. So the time zone you could describe as immediately before an election, right? So as to avoid the appearance of political impropriety. Now, Trump has taken that reality and exaggerated it, hyperbolically spun new webs of nonsense out of it for the, I think, explicit purposes of screaming bloody murder and claiming it's all a political witch hunt, and in violation of that it's not a law, it's not an actual written rule of the DOJ. It is an unwritten sort of, if you know, and that's not right. That's not correct. It's an unwritten sort of cultural norm within the bureaucracy of the DOJ. It's right up there next to the idea that they prefer not to. They're not legally prohibited from. They prefer not to bring legal indictments against a sitting president for reasons, having to do with disrupting the administration's ability to administer the government, right? To that extent, they typically wait until they theoretically are committed to waiting until after a president has left office. And we'll leave on this note. We'll wrap up the episode. Oh, wait, hold on. I'm going to talk about two more things, but I'm going to play a little bit of music to cleanse the palate. So my big concern is that things are going to unfold with like the uncannily perfectly imperfect timing for it to all waffle and fail. Because wink, wink, nudge, nudge, maybe, just maybe, at the highest heights of political power, the two parties are two wings of the same bird. I've been pointing this out to people on both sides. It appears that there's like complicity between the two of them. They seem, no matter how much they yell at each other, no matter how much they fight at each other, it's like a Punch and Judy show. Punch and Judy beat the shit out of each other in a Punch and Judy show. But typically, especially in the traditional original format, they're puppeteered by the same puppet master. Now, I'm not trying to lean into any conspiracy theory or another. I'm not trying to invoke conspiracy theory content. I'm just telling you, as an outside observer that's stuck here and that's been like, politics is interesting, I'm going to observe and I'm going to do it with my most sincerest and earnest attempt to not become biased one way or the other. Now, put a gun to my head. If I had to pick one party to support, if my life, were on the line, I'm sure as hell not going to support the Republicans. Because where we disagree thousands of times more egregiously than where the Democrats and I disagree. And I don't blindly agree with the Democrats. I get accused of it all the time. But that's categorically incorrect. I just don't disagree as much as I disagree with the Republicans, in part because, in major part, because of their religious hypocrisy. It just blows the Democrats out of the water, right? But for the record, I have never voted for a Democrat. Ever in my entire life. Put a pin on the corkboard if you haven't already. I've talked about it before. I'm sure I'll talk about it again on the show. Okay, I said I was going to play a little bit more music, cleanse the palate, and talk about two more things, which I completely forgot what they were. So I'll put the music on and see if it comes back to me. Here is a little bit of DJ Zed for you, a nice little short one so I can just play it all the way through. Long Haul Deniers, an EDM epidemic groove pad, audio entertainment track for your enjoyment. DJ Zed, me, myself, and I present to you the following. Just decided to poop out and completely failed to recall those two things that I thought I would like to talk about after the musical break. So I apologize, friends. But I am concerned that moving forward, as I was saying earlier, we're going to get to a point where Trump is going to claim political malpractice, despite the DOJ's efforts to find the perfect timing to potentially bring indictments. And then we're going to find ourselves in a Netanyahu situation. Oh, right. Thank you, brain. My brain just recalled things. Right. I recently posted on social media that it's quite alarming that Trump-topian style violence, political violence, seems to be trending around the world. And somebody's commentary is now, I'm reminded of it. A sort of on and off again Trump supporter, because he sometimes doesn't, but a social media acquaintance commented, "You're giving Donald Trump way too much credit." But they also sort of indicated that they had no idea what I was talking about. So first of all, there's Netanyahu, right? Who recently, although it's been a hot minute now, made some political wins and regained political power despite being actively under investigation for corruption. Now, this brings the nexus, the very, very curious hypocritical nexus of which is difficult to talk about, right? First of all, I do not tolerate anti-Semitism. And I really have no patience for the anti-Semitic conspiracy theory content out there, which is once again, flaring up again and rearing its ugly head and becoming normalized. And here's why. Corruption in the world exists amongst all cultural groups, in all political parties, and corruption is not culturally specific. But whenever it is presented in that fashion, it is almost always categorically part of us versus them neurolinguistic programming. So, I genuinely have to ask. I'm really seriously curious. And this is the third of really weird recent Trump activities. From as far back as Charlottesville incident, there has been an exponentially growing sort of commonality or common use, common refrain, common incidents. The ever increasing amount of anti-Semitic rhetoric coming from the right. Now, it's always been around. Hello. That's what World War II was all about. But it's also sort of catching on in the left because there's a lot of it going around. But the greatest irony, and I made a meme about this before, and I was accused of of perpetuating my own sort of interpretation of an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. But I was pointing out the curiosity that, okay, according to anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, and I'm not, forgive me for giving, this space on my podcast, but we're all familiar with the claim that, quote unquote, the Jews control everything. They control everything from the banking institutions to, Hollywood media outlets to politicians. I'm not trying to dignify that right now by giving it airtime, and I'm not trying to get into the debate about it either. Because, as I just said, corruption is not culturally, politically, ideologically, religiously, or racially specific. Have you met the human species? Corruption is corruption. No one group is a monolith of corruption. No one group is a monolith of purity and righteous, lack of corruption. Any ideological construct that indoctrinates you into that kind of thinking is manipulating you with obvious, painfully obvious, us versus them conditioning. And yet, why is it that the Trump base, which is obviously willing to climb into bed with American white nationalists, American neo-Nazis, American racists, American anti-Semites, and yet isn't outraged by the simple fact that Trump just spoke at the Republican Jewish, is it committee or council or conference? I think it's conference. Right? And the meme that I referenced earlier that I made, that people sort of inaccurately accuse me of being my own kind of conspiracy theory, which is not. I was asking, where's the outrage, right? Because conspiracy theory content will, anti-Semitic conspiracy content, accusing politicians of being controlled by, by nefarious international, quote unquote, international Jews, will constantly point to presidential visits to Jerusalem to typically include a prayerful moment at the Wailing Wall, right? Ironically, Trump did exactly that. So where was the outrage? Where was the accusation that he was a puppet for the nefarious cabal? Right? And that was at the very beginning of his presidency. And now, post-presidency, in an attempt to quite irrationally garner and earn the vote of Republican Jews, despite the fact Republican Jewish Americans, pardon my very unfortunate phrasing there, he's openly courting and trying to attract the votes of the American Republican Jewish Conference by speaking there. But he's also quite obviously continuing to cultivate the political relationship with the extreme alt-right white nationalist movement, right? And the Republicans kind of caught in the middle of that are some of the same people saying, bending over backwards to defend Russia's invasion of Crimea and subsequently, the rest of Ukraine by, blindly believing Putin's absolutely absurd claim that he's denazifying Ukraine. Am I in denial that there's probably, no, I'm not. Is it possible that there are actual Nazis in Ukraine? Of course there are. There are actual Nazis here. I'm not the one in denial about that. It's the Republican Party that's in denial about that. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. There's no white nationalist, neo-Nazi, white supremacist problem here. Oh, no, it's quite all right that the Ku Klux Klan is overtly campaigning for us out loud and in public. But they're, we're not, right? It's absurd. It's ridiculous. It's one of the biggest problematically obvious, hypocritical issues beyond the fact that they're just hypocritical as supposed self-proclaimed Christians. So how's that going to unfold? And then, what was the other thing? There was one other thing. Oh, right. This trending of Trump-topian-like political violence in other countries. The two most recent examples can be found in Germany and I believe Nicaragua. And forgive me if I got either of those. I don't think I got them wrong, but I'm absolutely certain. And don't take my word for it. Go look it up for yourself. But in Germany, they very recently, sometime in the last month or so, investigated and broke up and arrested German white nationalist neo-Nazis that were actively preparing to engage in political violence in order to foment a coup. To quote-unquote take back the German country and make it great again. Now, people be like, well, Trump had nothing to do with that. I'm sorry. It's not that I'm claiming that Trump was directly involved, but those people are utilizing the same white nationalist rhetoric that American white nationalist neo-Nazis and racists are utilizing here. And there's such a big and obvious crossover that over in Germany, those folks that were being arrested for, stockpiling weapons and making plans to get ready to overthrow the German government in order to, by use of force, install this guy who claims to be the direct descendant of some important German prince or another, in order to establish a more, righteous and quote-unquote true German patriarchy. They were all literally referencing QAnon as part of their inspiration for this political action, this political violence that they were engaging in. That's what qualifies it as Trump-topian-inspired political aggression in my book. And then in Nicaragua, and there's where my brain is a little uncomfortable. I'm like, am I getting the country wrong? But I'm fairly certain it's in Nicaragua. The sitting president was being, had done enough things to cause his, and obviously they're structured somewhat differently than they are here in America, but there was a body of Congress in Nicaragua decided to investigate him and conduct an impeachment. And we're lucky that Trump didn't try to pull something like this while sitting in office. But then again, if he had, we probably would have gotten much more definitive, criminal liability action. But he literally started off one day, someday recently, started off his morning by making an announcement that he was temporarily going to, by presidential decree, dissolve the Nicaraguan Congress, impose martial, spelled with a T, not with an SH, like the shopping, like the store, martial law. And isn't that hilarious? There's some synergy right there. That's Trump-topian enough, right? The fact that in the past and during the events of January 6th, Trump acolytes, Trump political supporters in political office were communicating with Trump's chief of staff and imploring him to invoke martial, like the shopping, like the fashion store, like the discount fashion store, martial law. It's not spelled that way. It's spelled with a T. But that's a whole nother issue. So this Nicaraguan president invokes martial law. I hope he spelled it correctly. Announces he's going to invoke martial law and dissolve the Constitution and install himself in a dictatorial fashion as something more than president. Now, curiously, in that country, by the end of that day, he was indicted and arrested. And impeachment proceedings began immediately from what I mean. He was impeached, arrested, and indicted. I'm not sure what order was correct in terms of the legal flow of it all. But he started off that day wanting to announce that he was going to, suspend the law so he could remain in power. And by the end of that day, he was incarcerated. It's wild. And that's just two examples of some of the absurd things that have been going on in other countries that have clear similarities and ties to what Trump has been doing and did, both leading up to and since January 6th. Okay. Now, lots of people are complaining that it's taken so long and that, why isn't he arrested yet? Why is there no indictments yet? Others, conversely, are saying that it's truly a sign of integrity that should give people hope that although there's issues and problematic individuals and corruption evident on both political parties' sides, that the system overall continues to sort of function within its design, even though there's obvious flaws in the design of the system. But that the investigations aren't being rushed, right? That he isn't just being arrested willy-nilly and then investigated. But I don't know. It's going to be a thrilling roller coaster ride of absurdity between now and the actual beginning of the 2024 election cycle, because it's not officially really begun yet, despite Trump's announcement and sort of attempt to kickstart it off already. And the big question in my mind is, my questions are way beyond whether or not the DOJ will indict. It's whether or not those indictments will come too late, too soon, and whether or not in the aftermath of such indictments, whether or not the two parties, will appear to complicitly with each other fumble all the balls necessary so that Trump gets away with it, right? Or will we see him, when all things are said and done, held to account, brought into a court of law and given a trial jury in front of a jury of his peers? I don't know. I don't pretend to know. I don't pretend to prognosticate. I don't pretend to predict the future. I do ask questions about what is most likely. And I do share my thoughts on what is probable. And my concern now is that it's entirely probable that this will unfold in the most absurdly Trumptopian fashion, right? And that we will see some people get indicted and some people go to court and some people be brought to justice, but not Donald Trump and his children, because they were political party players. They were quite, in an obvious case of total nepotism, installed in political office, and then clearly used that, for their own monetary gain. That's a whole nother episode. As always, friends, thank you for joining me. As always, friends, I don't say what I say so that you blindly agree with me. I say what I say so that you think about it, question it, and I invite your legitimate public discourse about it. But as always, I will admonish and call out anyone who takes that invitation as an opportunity to blindly troll and pointlessly attempt to mock, ridicule, dehumanize, vilify, and otherwise, bully and harass me or others. Because none of that is viable political discourse, right? I'm here to contribute my voice, my questions, my concerns, my perspective to the civilized public discourse. And yes, you can have some F-bombs in civilized public discourse. There's a big difference between using salty language and straight up verbal abuse. And if you don't understand that difference, I'm going to point it out to you. As always, friends, thank you. Namaste. Go out there, investigate the world, or better yet, go out there and live your life, right? Go out there and turn within and heal yourself. Because if there's ever going to be a place where we can solve the problematic issues of corruption in politics, it's going to be when we realize and recognize and start implementing spiritual healing of the long neglected emotional, psychological, esoteric, spiritual trauma that is the root cause of corruption. Corruption in politics, corruption in business, corruption in culture, corruption in individuals, corruption in human endeavor doesn't stem from all the nonsensical places that we point to when we seek to blame others. It stems from, in my humble opinion, and don't take my word for it blindly, go and figure it out for yourself by turning inwards and seeking your own pain, your own trauma that is sitting there left unresolved from whatever, past lives or recent events or your childhood, etc. The humans, and this is something I've said before and I'll say it again, clearly and with clarity and with, hopes that people will take up the challenge to seek out that healing. The human species will never be able to solve the situational, contextual problems that we create for ourselves through corruption in business and corruption in politics and corruption in culture and corruption in religion if we continue to neglect and ignore the centuries-long spiritual trauma that we keep passing down generation after generation. Even if you're not spiritual, even if you're not religious, even if you're agnostic or hardcore atheist, there is something in all of us that needs healing. And that can only be healed if we abdicate the ideology that we cling to. If we transcend the politics and cultural, economic, socio-political, racial identity masks that we choose to put on, and dig down deep and address our inner pain, our inner sanctum, as it were. If we go deep within and address that and heal it. There's a lot of statements about fixing the system, tearing down the system, rebuilding the system, replacing the system, and very little talk about healing those, healing the system, healing those of us who perpetuate the systems, healing all of us so that whatever systems we create are healthy.
And that is the latest madness from behind the orange wall. Thank you for listening to GMT, a special segment of the Almost Daily Zencast. Stay woke, Trumptopia. Stay woke.
There's a little bit of sarcasm in that, but for reals, folks, be good human beings to each other. I like to say this in my live stream for gaming content. Go be good human beings to each other out there in real life and in the game lobbies, in the game content, right? Let's go be good human beings to each other in our political discourse. Let's go be good human beings to each other in every context. May peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart, folks.